Hello, history buffs. Welcome back to the blog. In this video, you'll learn how it happened that the military machine that conquered most of Europe in just a few years was completely destroyed by 1945.
The Strategic Nightmare, Operation Barbarossa, and the Two-Front War. The decision to invade the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, codenamed Operation Barbarossa, is widely regarded by military historians as the single greatest mistake Adolf Hitler made, sealing the fate of the Third Reich. Until this point, Germany had successfully avoided the encirclement nightmare that had doomed them in World War I. However, by breaking the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and opening a massive Eastern Front, while Great Britain remained undefeated in the West, Germany willfully entered a suicidal two-front war. The sheer scale of the Soviet Union was something the German High Command had woefully underestimated. They planned for a lightning war, blitzkrieg, that would topple the Soviet government in mere months, believing the Red Army would collapse like a house of cards. They were wrong. The logistical challenges were insurmountable. The front line stretched for thousands of miles, from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. As German troops advanced deeper into the vast Russian steppes, their supply lines became dangerously overextended. The primitive Soviet road network turned into mud baths during the autumn rains, Rasputitsa, bogging down the vaunted panzer divisions, and then froze solid during the brutal Russian winter. German soldiers, equipped only for a summer campaign, suffered horrific frostbite and equipment failure. Their weapons jammed and their vehicle engines froze, while the Soviets, acclimated to the environment and equipped with winter gear, launched devastating counteroffensives. Furthermore, the manpower drain was catastrophic. The Eastern Front became a meat grinder that consumed the bulk of the Wehrmacht's strength. Approximately 80% of all German military casualties during World War II occurred on the Eastern Front. The Soviet Union's ability to absorb massive losses and continue fighting was a shock to Berlin. For every Soviet army the Germans encircled and destroyed, another seemed to materialize from the reserves. The Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943, served as the psychological and military turning point. The loss of the entire German Sixth Army was a blow from which the Wehrmacht never truly recovered. By committing so many resources to the east, Germany left its western flank vulnerable. When the Allies eventually landed in Normandy in 1944, D-Day, Germany simply did not have the reserves to push them back into the sea because their best units were dying in the Russian snow. The two-front war split the Luftwaffe, diluted the armored divisions, and ensured that Germany would be squeezed to death from both sides.
The economic mismatch, the war of production. World War II was ultimately decided by economics and industrial capacity. Simply put, the Allied powers, specifically the United States, the Soviet Union, and the British Empire, completely outproduced the Axis powers. Germany entered the war with a formidable military, but its economy was not structured for a long, drawn-out war of attrition. The United States, often referred to as the arsenal of democracy, possessed an industrial capability that Germany could not hope to match. Once the U.S. war machine mobilized, the disparity in numbers became overwhelming. For every Tiger tank Germany produced, a marvel of engineering but complex and expensive, the Allies produced dozens of Sherman or T-34 tanks. They were reliable, easy to repair, and available in endless numbers. Germany also suffered from a chronic lack of essential natural resources, most critically oil and rubber. The German war machine ran on oil, yet Germany had almost no domestic oil reserves. They relied heavily on synthetic fuel production, hydrogenation of coal, and imports from Romania. This resource scarcity dictated military strategy,
forcing disastrous decisions like the diversion of forces to the Caucasus in 1942 to capture oil fields, which left the flank at Stalingrad exposed. As the war progressed, the Allies targeted this weakness specifically. Strategic bombing campaigns relentlessly pounded synthetic oil plants and refineries. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was grounded not because they lacked planes, but because they lacked fuel to fly them. Tanks were abandoned on the roadside simply because they had run dry. In contrast, the Allied supply chain was robust. The Lend-Lease program provided by the United States was a lifeline for Britain and the Soviet Union, supplying them with trucks, locomotives, food, and raw materials that kept their armies moving. While German industry relied increasingly on slave labor, which was often inefficient and prone to sabotage, Allied factories were operating at peak efficiency with a motivated workforce. Furthermore, German engineering, while brilliant, was often over-engineered. They obsessed over creating the perfect weapon with tight tolerances and complex mechanics. This made maintenance in the field a nightmare. The Allies prioritized quantity and standardization. When a German tank broke down, it might need a specialized part from a factory in Berlin. When an American tank broke down, parts could be cannibalized from another unit. In a total war, quantity has a quality all its own, and the sheer weight of Allied material superiority crushed the German capacity to resist.
The collapse of the skies, loss of air superiority. The destruction of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, and the subsequent Allied domination of the skies was a decisive factor in Germany's defeat. In the early years of the war, the Luftwaffe was the most feared air force in the world, pioneering the use of close air support to facilitate blitzkrieg. However, the tide began to turn during the Battle of Britain in 1940. Germany failed to destroy the Royal Air Force, RAF, meaning they could not secure the air superiority required for an invasion of England. This failure allowed Britain to remain a launchpad for future Allied operations. As the war dragged on, the entry of the United States Army Air Forces, USAAF, changed the equation entirely. The Allies launched a combined bomber offensive. The Americans bombed by day and the British bombed by night, ensuring that Germany was under attack 24/7. This aerial campaign had two devastating effects. First, it destroyed Germany's infrastructure. Cities, factories, and rail networks were reduced to rubble. This severely disrupted the production and transport of war material. As mentioned earlier, the targeting of oil facilities was crippling. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it forced the Luftwaffe into a war of attrition they could not win. To defend their cities, the Germans had to send their fighters up against massive formations of Allied bombers protected by long-range escort fighters like the P-51 Mustang. The P-51 was a game-changer. It could fly all the way to Berlin and back, hunting down German interceptors. The result was the systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe's pilot corps. While aircraft production actually remained high until late in the war, thanks to underground factories, Germany ran out of experienced pilots to fly them. Training programs were cut short to rush novices to the front, where they were essentially cannon fodder for well-trained Allied aviators. By D-Day in 1944, the Allies had total air supremacy. They could bomb German troop movements, supply convoys, and panzer divisions with impunity. German General Rommel famously noted that anyone who had to fight without air superiority would find that they were fighting like a savage against modern European troops. The inability to move during the day without being strafed by a typhoon or a P-47 Thunderbolt paralyzed the German army. Furthermore, thousands of menacing 88mm anti-aircraft guns, which were also Germany's best anti-tank weapons, had to be kept in Germany to defend cities rather than being used on the front lines against Soviet and American tanks. The loss of the air war left the Reich defenseless.
Intelligence failures, Bletchley Park, and the Enigma. While battles are fought with bullets, wars are often won with information. One of the most significant yet invisible reasons for Germany's defeat was the comprehensive failure of their intelligence services and the Allied success in cryptography. The Germans used the Enigma machine to encrypt their radio communications, believing the code was unbreakable due to its billions of possible permutations. They were dangerously overconfident. They did not know that a team of brilliant mathematicians and linguists at Bletchley Park in England, including the famous Alan Turing, had cracked the Enigma code. This intelligence, codenamed Ultra, gave the Allies a godlike view of German operations. The impact of Ultra was felt in every theater of the war. In the Battle of the Atlantic, German U-boats were initially devastating, sinking tons of Allied shipping and threatening to starve Britain. However, once the naval Enigma codes were broken, the Allies could route their convoys around wolf packs of U-boats and hunt the submarines down with depth charges. In North Africa, the British knew exactly when General Rommel's supply convoys were arriving from Italy and sank them, leaving the Afrika Korps without fuel or ammunition at critical moments. The Germans attributed these losses to bad luck or spies, never suspecting their communications were compromised. Beyond cryptography, German intelligence, the Abwehr, was riddled with incompetence and internal rivalry. They were constantly outplayed by Allied counterintelligence. The most famous example is Operation Fortitude, a massive deception campaign prior to D-Day. The Allies created a phantom army, UFAG, under General Patton in southeast England, complete with inflatable tanks and fake radio traffic, to convince the Germans that the invasion would come at the Pas de Calais, not Normandy. The deception was so successful that Hitler kept his powerful 15th Army stationed at the Pas de Calais for weeks after the real invasion had already begun in Normandy, waiting for a real attack that never came. Had those divisions been moved to Normandy immediately, the beachhead might have been crushed. Germany's inability to protect its secrets, combined with its susceptibility to Allied deception, meant they were constantly reacting to Allied moves rather than dictating the flow of the war. They were fighting blind against an enemy that could read their mind.
Leadership failures, Hitler's meddling and incompetence. There is a popular myth that the German generals were brilliant geniuses who were only defeated because of Hitler's amateur interference. While the generals certainly made mistakes, there is truth to the fact that Adolf Hitler's leadership was a catastrophic liability for Germany. As the war turned against the Reich, Hitler took increasingly direct control over military operations, often overruling his experienced field marshals. His primary flaw was his rigid, ideological obsession with standing fast. He developed a pathological refusal to allow tactical retreats. In modern mobile warfare, a tactical retreat is often necessary to shorten supply lines, regroup, and avoid encirclement. Hitler viewed retreat as cowardice and treason. This no-retreat policy led to the unnecessary destruction of entire armies. At Stalingrad, General Paulus asked for permission to break out of the Soviet encirclement while he still had the strength. Hitler refused, ordering them to fight to the last man. The result was the loss of 250,000 soldiers. Similar stand-fast orders were issued in North Africa, Normandy, and Belarus, turning manageable setbacks into total disasters. Hitler also obsessed over symbolism rather than strategy. He diverted forces to capture cities like Stalingrad simply because it bore the name of his enemy, Joseph Stalin, even when the city had lost its strategic value. Furthermore, Hitler was obsessed with wonder weapons, Wunderwaffe, at the expense of practical solutions. He poured immense resources into the V-2 rocket program. While technologically impressive, the first man-made object to reach space, the V-2 was inaccurate and had no strategic impact on the war outcome. The resources used to build V-2s could have produced thousands of jet fighters. Speaking of jets, when the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, was ready, Hitler insisted it be used as a blitz bomber rather than an interceptor, delaying its deployment against Allied bombers for months. Finally, the command structure of the Third Reich was a mess of competing egos. Hitler encouraged rivalry among his subordinates to ensure he was the only final authority. This led to inefficiency and lack of coordination. By the end of the war, his mental state had deteriorated, and he was moving imaginary divisions on a map in a bunker, completely detached from the reality of the front lines. His leadership ensured that the war continued long after it was lost, leading to the total destruction of Germany.
The defeat of Germany was a complex mix of bad strategy, being outproduced, outspied, and poorly led. Let me know in the comments which of these factors you think was the most critical. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more history deep dives.